Hey, thank you. There you go, sir.
Thank you, sir.
All right, I think we're ready. Again, thank you all for being here. We're so pleased you all could make it, and we're really looking forward to this discussion of this event. My name is Tess Saxton-Fox. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Aerospace Engineering, and I'm going to start us off tonight. The first thing we're going to do is introduce each of our panelists, and we're going to give them each a chance to also give us kind of a short introduction of their relationship to the Tuskegee Airmen. I also want to acknowledge that one of our panelists is online, and we're also very grateful for his participation. I want to first ask if anyone here is a relative of a Tuskegee Airman, and if you are, I'd love to have you stand so we can acknowledge you. All right, so let's get into our panel discussion, but I'm sure you all have stories too, so maybe afterwards we can hear your stories as well. I want to start off with our professor from the University of Illinois, Professor Ronald Bailey. He's a head of our Department of African American Studies at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He has research areas in historical studies and the intellectual history of African American studies. His degrees came from one from Michigan State University for his bachelor's degree, which includes fluency in Russian, and then his master's and his PhD from Stanford. He's taught at many universities, including Fisk University, Cornell, Northwestern, University of Mississippi, and Northeastern, where he was actually the chair of the Department of African American Studies for 8 years. He's authored many books and journals, and in many different journal papers, in many journals. And we're going to ask him to start us off by telling us a little bit about his relationship to Tuskegee Airmen as a child and how that influenced your childhood.
Thank you. This is one of the first public face-to-face gatherings we've been in a long time, so I appreciate this opportunity. And I wondered why I'm up here with this distinguished group of fighter pilots and so on. And my story is very personal. My mother was a graduate of Tuskegee in 1946. And the story goes that my father was in the military at Fort Benning, and a group of his buddies asked the sergeant if they could borrow the car to go to Montgomery for a jazz concert. And he said, the only way you can go is that Bailey drives because he doesn't drink. So off they went, these soldiers up to Montgomery. And my mother was a senior at Tuskegee, and her sisters were taking her to do back-to-school shopping. And so at the jazz concert, you can imagine what happened. My father and my mother met in 1946, and in 1948 of May, here I am. So I grew up with the Tuskegee Airmen story. I'd go back to reunions with her, and we'd get the tour of Bogan Field and so forth and so on, going through the museum. And so I grew up with that history, and I think also with a love for history. So the big point I want to make, and you'll hear the quote later on, we look beyond. And that's a quote from Hidden Figures, the movie that we've probably seen. I'll talk about that at the end. But what I want to point out is that if we look beyond, like the quote in that movie from Ms. Johnson, we will see that before the Tuskegee, beyond the Tuskegee Airmen, before the Tuskegee Airmen, there were several examples we need to talk about. One is Eugene Bullitt, who was a Georgia boy who left Columbus, Georgia at the age of 14 or 15, and he ended up in Paris, where he learned to fly. And he came back to the U.S. during World War I and says, "Can I fly for the United States?" And they said, "No, we don't need you to fly for us." So he went back to Paris and joined the French Legion and became the first black fighter pilot flying for the French, not for the U.S. And he was African American and Native American. The second story is Bessie Coleman of Chicago, who's a black woman who wanted to fly, couldn't get lessons in the U.S., so what did she do? She went to Paris. She went to France and learned how to fly and came back to the U.S. and became the first black woman with a pilot's license. And so in those two stories, you see manifested the difficulties that black people faced. Competent, brave, courageous. I won't tell you about my flying lessons, right? But they couldn't fly for their own country. And so I put the Tuskegee Airmen and what lessons we learned from them in that same context. They were path-breaking military participants. They lit the fire, I think, under a lot of black people who saw, oh yeah, yes I can, as the phrase goes. So that's the story that I want to leave you with. And I'll say more about this later, but their legacies are still active. There's a monument that was just built in Georgia to celebrate Bullitt's life. And in a couple of months from now, a group of Bessie Coleman's descendants will be in Paris honoring her legacy, I think May or June of 2022. So we can talk about that a little later on. But that's the story I wanted to tell, and it has to do with how important it is that we tell more of these stories to our young people, black, white, people, kids of all nationalities, so that they can begin to sort out some of the mess we're leaving them in contemporary society. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey. All right, it's my pleasure to introduce Reginald Duvall, who's from hop, skip, and a jump from here in Indianapolis. He's an Air Force Academy graduate and started his Air Force career at Rantoul, so just north of here, and served at bases all over the world from Spain and Egypt from 1979 to 1992. He now is a paralegal working with the Military Assistance Project and is president of the Indianapolis Chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, Incorporated. He has participated in numerous events with the Airmen since the Double Victory came out, and his father-in-law was one of the Red Tails. So, Mr. Duvall, first of all, thank you for all of the help putting this together and helping us learn more about the Airmen as our group. And can you tell us why you got involved with the Airmen group and the kind of things you do for the organization?
Well, thank you for inviting me today. And unlike my distinguished panel member here, I'm not from Tuskegee, but I was raised by Tuskegee Airmen and didn't know it. There were 13 graduates of the flying school that came out of Crispus Attucks High School right there in Indianapolis. Well, where did my parents go? Crispus Attucks High School. I got involved because I didn't know and I liked to learn. When I went to my first meeting, a gentleman, one of the Tuskegee Airmen, came up and said, "Duvall, come here, boy." And I'm like, "Yes, sir." He goes, "You know, I could have been your uncle." I'm like, "What?" "Well, I sure liked your dad's sister." Well, my dad had 4 sisters. So I sat down and became quiet. And what I learned is that the stories that the individual airmen were telling needed to be stitched together. So let me throw this real fast. One, I'm here to make sure I get back those airmen that Illinois stole from Indiana. There is no East Chicago, Illinois. Indiana provided some great talent to the whole process. And if you look at the talent that was provided, it tells you a lot about the story. Only 6% of persons in the United States had college degrees, and they had to lower the standards to make sure they had enough pilots. So there was a college training detachment that would take care of those who were not prepared. Where did that gentleman come from, Theodore Randall? From Indianapolis, Indiana. Well, he prepared folks to go to the first half of pilot training that was handled by Tuskegee Institute, and that was led by Lewis Jackson. So you saw the picture of Eleanor Roosevelt with Chief Anderson. He was Chief Anderson's boss. And if you look at the bigger picture, you will see Lewis Jackson standing underneath the wing. Who was in that first class of 5 pilots? You know, I'm going to say a guy from Indianapolis, Charles DeBow. And Charles DeBow was very, very excited. Yes, he came out of Crispus Attucks High School. He was so excited about what he did. He wrote stories. I got my wings. He motivated many, many gentlemen to become Tuskegee Airmen. So there were more, was 2.5 times as many airmen that came out of Illinois as there were out of Indiana, so I'm not beating up Indiana. Out of all the Tuskegee Airmen, the first Tuskegee Airman to shoot down an enemy fighter is on the Indiana-Illinois border. It's Charles Hall out of Brazil, Indiana. That longest mission that was flown to Berlin was led by our first chapter president. And where is he from? Come on.
Illinois.
He's from Virginia, but he moved to Indiana. The issue is we still need, and I appreciate you being here, to learn these lessons, talk to the family members. We don't know how these things intertwine. What's important at the end of the day is not what we got tonight, but what you take out of here and do with this. And what's most important is what young people see in their mind based on this history that's being shared. Sorry to go on so long.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, you can have a So we're going to keep on going. It's my pleasure to introduce U.S. Air Force Captain Sidney Ganison, who is currently deployed and is joining us via Zoom, which is very gracious of you, given that you're deployed currently. He's originally from Maryland, and he's been in the U.S. Air Force since he earned his bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in 2014. He served as a deputy flight commander for plans and resources and the Space Systems Cybersecurity Program Manager at Fort George G. Meade, and then became the recruiting officer at Howard University. He's currently the chief of safety and C-21A pilot for the 458th Airlift Squadron, based at the Scott Air Force Base here in Illinois. He's responsible for providing priority airlift for high-level military, civilian, and foreign distinguished visitors throughout North, Central, and South America. He's also currently pursuing a master's degree in aerospace engineering at Embry-Riddle, and he has over 600 military hours, including 60 combat hours flying the T-6A Texan II, T-1A Jayhawk, and the C-21A Learjet. And, very relevant to tonight's discussion, he recently was a member of the first all-African-American crew to land a C-21 at Alabama's Tuskegee Airfield, so very relevant to this. And for you, we're going to ask you if you can speak a little bit about why you decided to participate or how it was important to you to participate in that November flight to Tuskegee Airfield. Thank you so much for being here.
Sure. Of course, can everybody hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Awesome. Yeah, so thanks for inviting me for this. I've had a passion for flying since I was a really little kid. I remember seeing the movie Tuskegee Airmen back when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and seeing that movie, asking my parents, like, why do these one group of people not like this other group of people flying the red tails? And they had to explain all that to me. I can imagine that was a pretty hard conversation for to have with a 5 or 6 year old. But that movie inspired me to really become more into aviation and flying. My dad was a pilot, flew on the AWACS in the Air Force as well. So that also probably inspired me to become a pilot in the Air Force. But specifically for this flight down to Tuskegee, as you know, as you heard from my bio, I was first in cyberspace, but then I later transitioned to become a pilot in the Air Force. And the C-21, as you can see behind me, is my first flying assignment in the Air Force. It's all I've known flying in the Air Force. So when I got to my squadron, it's a squadron of about 50, 60 pilots, which is a pretty small squadron for the Air Force. There was myself and only one other black pilot, Kyle Green. And for about a year, I barely knew him. We never flew together, but after that year, we finally got a chance to fly together. And Kyle Green comes from the C-17s, and C-17s are a pretty big community in the Air Force of hundreds of pilots. So when we sat in the cockpit and we're talking, and he told me, this is my first time flying with another black pilot, that kind of blew me away. I assumed that, considering how diverse the Air Force is, that somebody who had been in a big community like C-17s would have suddenly flown with another black pilot or something like that, but that was not the case. So about a month later, Captain Johnny Fry, the third black pilot in our squadron, arrived to the squadron, and at that point I knew the three of us have to fly together, have to do some sort of mission together or something like that. So we sat down, kind of started planning stuff out, and the C-21, as you can see behind me, it's a pretty small aircraft. It's a pretty small transportation aircraft. So we can get into some pretty unique places. You need about 5,000 feet of runway to land, and after you land, you need about a 35-foot taxiway to taxi the plane to the ramp. Well, 06 Alpha, also known as Moulton Field, also known as Tuskegee Field, has exactly a 5,005-foot runway. It also has exactly a 35-foot wide taxiway. So this, we figured, would be perfect. It'd be a great heritage flight to do. And so we end up having basically 3 reasons that we did this flight. First and foremost, because, we need to be professional aviators, it was training. Flying into Moulton Field, there's a lot of general aviation traffic. It's a small airport, so it's great, fantastic training for the 3 of us as pilots to hone our skills. Second was heritage, because I'm a firm believer that if you don't remember history, if you don't follow history, you're doomed to repeat it. So by learning from your past mistakes, you can become a better person, better aviator, better all around. And also just going there and seeing where this all began, seeing where these men trained and took to the skies and basically paved the way for pilots like us to do the same thing that they're doing, to get into the air and pursue this passion, pursue this dream, was just incredible, honestly. It's like when you land there, when you get out the plane, you can feel the souls of those men there at that field. It was absolutely incredible. And then third was outreach, because it was great to reach out to the community. We got to meet a flying training club down there, and talk to the students, talk to the other pilots down there, and kind of tell them about our experiences, tell them about what it's like being a pilot in the Air Force, and got to know them. So that was also a great opportunity. I definitely want to go back down to the Tuskegee at some point.
Thank you, Captain Gannison. It's my pleasure to introduce our last panelist, U.S. Navy Captain Alex Hampton, and is currently the Deputy Airwing Commander of Carrier Airwing 7. You can see the big 7 on his flight suit there. He's a fellow 1999 graduate like me from here with a degree in business administration, and holds a master's degree in national security and strategic studies from the U.S. Naval War College. He completed his initial flight training at Va Beach with the Gladiators, and his operational flying with the Sunliners of Strike Fighter Squadron 8-1. He's a graduate of I'll use it, Top Gun, as most of us know it, and subsequently reported to the East Coast Weapons School for Air-to-Air Employment Subject Matter Expert, that's a mouthful, and the Training Standardization Officer. He served as department head in Strike Fighter 136, the Nighthawks, and it has been deployed many times through Operation Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, and New Dawn. He reported to the Pentagon to serve on the Joint Staff as the Deputy Division Chief for the JA Studies and Analysis and Wargaming Division, and was hand-selected to serve the Deputy Executive Assistant to the 20th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Miley. Okay. Captain Hampton has accumulated more than 3,500 total flight hours, 3,100 of which is in the F-18, and 850 carrier traps. So, Captain Hampton, how has your knowledge of the Tuskegee Airmen influenced your decisions to go into the military and become a naval aviator?
Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for the invite down here. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for attending tonight's event. I think it is a great historical and educational process that you're putting yourself through tonight. My journey to pursue aviation started when I was a very small child. You can ask my mother, she's sitting right there. But I told her when I was 12 years old, I wanted to be a pilot growing up in Chicago, Illinois, and close to O'Hare Airport, and watching the big, huge planes come in and land. I said, I want to fly one of those things one day. And really the blueprint to how you get there was unknown to myself. So I pursued the first thing that someone told me to do. And my aunt actually got me in contact with a commercial airline pilot. And he said, well, the vast majority of commercial airline pilots get their experience in the military. So naturally, I went off to the military. And that was my first real focus and vision of being laser focused and achieving something growing up in Chicago, Illinois. So I came down to the University of Illinois. I played football for 4 years down here. Great experience. And then I went off to flight school when I graduated in 1999. And what I experienced, my primary flight school was in Enid, Oklahoma, Vance Air Force Base in Enid, Oklahoma, cross training with the Air Force, which at that time was a very eye-opening experience, I will say. And that forced me to study constantly, staying on base. I guess the combination of the environment and my mother pushing me and telling me I better come out of that class number one really made me laser focused, and I finished that primary flight school absolutely number one. And my dream was to fly P3s because my thought was as a P3 pilot, that would be the closest transition to commercial aircraft, and I could go and get a job in the commercial airline industry. And when I finished number one, my very first mentor, and this is the power of mentorship, my very first mentor was a commander. And the leader of that squadron that I was in at the time, Splash Coy, he said, he was an F-14 pilot, and of course he said, no. The number one person that finishes flight school picks jets, period. And from that point on, I picked the F-18 because I thought it looked better than the F-14 at the time. Pure looks, pure aesthetics. And I started my flight training from there. Like I said, 2006, graduated from the Naval Fighter Weapons School, also known as Top Gun. And for me, it's always been a competition, and it's always been a proving ground. It's a necessity for me to prove myself and my ability in the plane. And a lot of that comes from my history and my being a student of history and men like the Tuskegee Airmen who absolutely made my career possible. That was 23 years I started that journey. Right now I'm the Deputy Airwing Commander of a air wing in the United States Navy that consists of 80 aircraft. I've been flying the F-18 for all of my career, pushing almost 1,000 traps in that platform, flying off of 10 aircraft carriers in the United States Navy so far. We leave in August for our deployment, going out. So still doing the country's bidding, and still with a tremendous pride in the service and the patriotism that is shown from every single man and woman that serves in the United States military, in the United States Navy. Like I said, my journey started from one point wanting to be a commercial airline pilot. In order to do that, I needed about 8 years of experience, and 23 years later, I wouldn't have it any other way. I very much so enjoy flying the F-18 every day. I equate flying commercial airline in the commercial airline industry to driving a school bus right now. Right now, I'm driving for NASCAR. And flying a commercial airliner would be the equivalent of me driving a school bus. But I want to continue to pursue my career. Right now, I have 80 aircraft and about 2,000 people in the command that I'm in. I fly a helicopter. I fly the E-2D Hawkeye, which is our command and control platform. I fly the EA-18 Growler and a series of different aircraft every single day off the United States aircraft carrier, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you for being here.
I have to ask, is there a further place from saltwater for a Navy man than Oklahoma?
No, right in the middle.
All right, so we're going to get started with some questions, and they're going to have kind of a variety of topics so we can use everyone's expertise. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about the history and the context that the Tuskegee Airmen were living in, and specifically talking about segregation in that time. And so we're going to maybe start with Dr. Bailey and then move around here. But can you talk to us a little bit about the larger context of segregation, why the military was segregated, and how that kind of played out, and what these men were experiencing in their daily lives?
Well, you saw a glimpse of it in the movie, because Tuskegee was an all-black institution founded by Booker T. Washington, 1890s or so. And if you go back and think about U.S. history, even though there was civil rights legislation after the Civil War that said, equality, it was in 1890, the Supreme Court ordered separate but equal. And so there were a few black colleges that got started before then, but for the most part, higher education as well as secondary education and most of the institutions were segregated. Kind of controversial because a lot of times people look at black institutions now and say, well, why do you need black colleges? There is a legacy, a deep and profound historical and cultural legacy and the foundation was laid in that segregated experience. Black people had to make the best of what we had, so you get the colleges, fraternities, sororities, schools, and so on. And I would argue that if we look today at where most black people live in the South, where most black college graduates come from, the HBCUs, that legacy still resonates. What's frustrating about it, if you go and think about the recent Supreme Court hearings, that legacy is still nibbling at us in very big ways. And so, we still have to find a way to fight for, equal access to opportunities. And I think the importance of this kind of discussion is that we can take that history and figure out where did we go wrong, and then use these lessons to figure out what can we do today to build on that foundation and that legacy so that we can improve opportunities and expand opportunities for more and more, particularly underserved youth of color, black and brown youth, poor youth. I'm from a small rural town, 33 kids in my high school. We talk about segregation. My high school in 1965 was segregated. I was from a small black county school, and I had 33 kids in my graduating class. When we went to state science fairs, all of the black kids would go to Fort Valley State University, where the chancellor graduated from, interestingly enough, and other kids would go around the state. So I think one of the frustrating things is that not enough people, especially people who are not black, understand that rich legacy. And therefore, it's devalued when it comes time to think about what could have been done if the Tuskegee Airmen had had more opportunities and more of them had been positioned to fly, and so on. So that's my concern. And I want to come back to that when I talk about hidden figures, and ask us to think about the lessons from that history as we continue to grapple with contemporary times.
Thank you. That's a great answer. And I think we definitely want to bring that connection to now, and that'll be something we continue to talk about. Does anyone else want to jump in? Mr. Duvall, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, he covered about 3 questions there.
The specific question was really just about segregation at the time, segregation in the communities that they were living in, as well as in the military, and helping us understand more richly that context.
Segregation, it was the rule of the day. We did this back in 2012, and I would typically start the presentation following this movie and start my conversation with, it was a time of war. It was a time of economic uncertainty. It was a time of great unsureness. And it was also a time when certain people felt they were more entitled to the American dream based on the color of their skin. And I would pause and I would say, am I talking about today or am I talking about World War II? And I was doing that in 2012. So I find, isn't it of interest that we're still there? So I would suggest maybe we need to shift the dialogue from the way we've been talking about segregation. What we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is about recognizing the humanity in the next person, simply put. And it will turn into many different things. So bringing it forward to today, maybe we need new language to talk about what do we mean. Segregation, I tell young kids, well, that's how I like to eat my jelly beans. Move the red ones over here and the green ones over here, but I like them all together. Maybe, and they get it. So maybe we need to just look at how do we recognize the humanity in each other. And towards that end, I want to make sure we recognize who this man is. I don't think we recognize. Anybody seen the Top Gun movie? Tom Cruise? Yeah. The first time, I know you have, the first Top Guns in the United States Air Force were gentlemen that were Tuskegee Airmen. Were gentlemen that were Tuskegee Airmen. They were Tuskegee Airmen. The services were integrated, and Benjamin Davis said, I'm sending you out, and if you don't win, don't come back. Now, most importantly, and he knows this, he just didn't say it. He talks about the aircraft and how many pilots. There are 10 times as many support people. I turned down pilot training, I was a support person. In that aspect of the Tuskegee Airmen story, I think as well, we have to focus on in terms of we're helping people prepare themselves for jobs that don't yet exist. And in order to do that, well, we'll continue. I'll stop there.
That was great. And I love this kind of focus on bringing us to today. Do you have you want to jump in?
I'd just like to bring up the generational effects of segregation. I believe my grandfather's Army was a lot different service than the Navy that I serve in to this day. And to that effect, my father's Air Force was a lot different institution than the Navy that I serve in today. Currently today, less than 2% of all Navy fighter pilots are African American. I am the highest ranking fighter pilot in the United States Navy right now. We do not have an admiral that is a fighter pilot that is black in the United States Navy. Every single unit that I've served in my career, I've been the only black pilot. And that type of generational effect is why we still see the numbers and we still see the culture of the organizations that we still work within today. We have done great work in the past, but there is still great work to be done. But the highlight and what makes me sleep well at night is I have 2 boys and I have a young female child. And I am a firm believer that my children will be able to enjoy everything that they want to in the United States military and in the America that they're gonna grow up in the future. That work started a long, long time ago, but that work is being continued to make sure that that is an actual reality and not just a pipe dream of a father in 2022. Mm-hmm.
Any other contributions, or should we move on to the next question?
Just echo what Captain Hampton said. It's like I said, it was surprising to me to find out just like how few black pilots that we have like in the military, in the Air Force today. And I have to say though, things are, at least in terms of how we're treated in the military and the service, are definitely progressing. I know like my dad's and his dad's Air Force were completely different. And I'm sure we're going to get to this later, but going through flight training, being in the Air Force, for me, the struggle has been just completing flight training. I can't imagine what it was like actually back then being segregated, completing, not only just completing flight training, but also having to deal with racial issues, segregation, and all that stuff. It had to have been 100 times more difficult.
Thank you all. That leads us to a good transition to the next question. With the climate of the 1940s, what do you think drove the pilots to be so, the Tuskegee Airmen, we saw it in the video, to be so patriotic? And this is for anyone.
I'll take that one first. So we recently moved down from Arlington, Virginia, where I was stationed and I worked at the Pentagon. And I would note walking out of that building every day and seeing the nation's capital. First of all, I think every American should live in Washington, D.C. and actually see the nation's capital, the very foundation of the nation and where the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, all of that good stuff gets exercised from. But moving down from Arlington to Virginia Beach, Virginia, we recently bought a house, and there was an American flag, flying outside that house. And I will say, one of my conditions on closing for that house, was that American flag stays. And we had a family conversation about whether that American flag applies outside of our house. And this is a conversation of my family in 2021. I will say that I am extremely patriotic. I think the United States of America is the greatest nation on earth. I think the words in the Constitution form the greatest government and the greatest society that has ever existed on earth. We have yet to live up to the words of the Constitution, and we still drive towards that goal. But our defense of this nation and the way that we have collectively built this nation, I think is something for every American to be proud of, and that's what makes me proud to serve every day.
Thank you.
Definitely agree with that. I am completely proud to wear this flag, and honestly, I think it's a lot of the same reasons that people decide to stand up and serve today, that they see, and just like it was said in documentary, you hope for better for the country. You hope to build upon the legacy of people who came before you and make this country even better than it was before. And standing up and saying, I will defend and support the Constitution, I believe in those core values and core principles, I think is a huge factor for a lot of people who serve, and especially people, the Tuskegee Airmen, who stood up and say, hey, I will support and defend the Constitution, regardless of what the climate is right now in the United States. I know that it can be better, and I will do my part to make it better.
Thank you very much.
Since Crispus Attucks, African Americans have been fighting for this country, not for the purpose of greater inclusion. So, I mean, that's simple, clear. General Charles McGee, graduate, or not graduate, but he went here to University of Illinois, Tuskegee Airmen, recently passed, all right? Started at Chanute. He became an Eagle Scout in 1940 in Gary, Indiana. But he the Boy Scouts have recently put in a new merit badge as a requirement for making Eagle Scout. Citizenship in society, and what do they talk about? Tolerance for the beliefs of others. Citizenship is an evolving dynamic, and we really need to listen to some young folks might help us out with what it should and could be.
I kind of take the same historical analysis of that question. My work has largely been on the slave trade and the role of slave labor in growing cotton in the United States that was shipped first to Great Britain to fuel their industrial revolution, and then later on to Rhode Island and Massachusetts that fueled the textile industry, right? And so the rise of industrial capitalism in this country is profoundly rooted in the experiences of enslaved Africans producing not just cotton, but sugar and so on. And so I see the patriotism of the military men and some women in this period as connected to fighting for what is rightfully theirs, fighting to enjoy the rights of a nation and the privileges of a nation that's rooted in their sacrifice in terms of free labor. So that's the general point. And when the reason I want to talk about Hidden Figures is that the key thing in that movie is that this black woman who was not allowed to go to schools where other white people went and so on, it was her mathematical genius that calculated how to return that spacecraft of John Glenn back to Earth. If you remember the movie, you know how much attention and time was, they didn't know if they were going to get it back. And she had the brain power to do it. And you think about how much has been lost and wasted because somebody felt that these black people weren't entitled to what had been historically earned. And so I think that what we see throughout history, and especially with these Tuskegee Airmen, is just a manifestation of that. You know, this is rightfully as much mine as anybody else. And we're going to fight and sacrifice for it, not without criticizing the flaws of the nation, but pointing them out and fighting to correct them so that generations to come, you know, can enjoy those rights and privileges without the hassles that we've had to fight to get everybody there.
Thank you. That kind of cuts off my next question, so I'll turn it back over to Tess.
I'm going to, for those of you who know the order of the questions, going to jump around a little bit because I want to build off of some of what you're all saying. And I want to talk about the 477th a little bit, which we learned about in the film about the protest. And I want to ask about, you know, connecting some of that, both understanding the context of that, what other protests were happening within the military at that time that we can understand that this was kind of related to or part of a larger movement. And also, how does that relate to some of what we see today? Are there analogies we can understand in terms of people standing up for what's right and still being, you know, effectively court-martialed or put in prison or otherwise reprimanded for standing up for what they believe to be right?
May I do the pretext?
Absolutely.
In August, it was on August 3rd, 1944, 12 black officers led by Captain Willard B. Ransom entered the West Dining Room of the Tuskegee Army Airfield Post-Exchange restaurant, which had been reserved for white officers and demanded service. Well, I should tell you, you ever heard of Madam C.J. Walker? Mm-hmm. She had a Harvard-trained attorney named Freeman Ransom, who had a son who was a Harvard-trained attorney who happened to be an attorney down in Tuskegee. And somewhere I read those Harvard-trained attorneys could read, and he read the regulation that said, if I'm an officer, I can go to any open mess. So let me continue. When Second Lieutenant George Fry, assistant exchange officer, asked the black officers to go to the larger East Dining Room reserved for them, Captain Ransom showed Fry 2 War Department letters that noted service at base recreational facilities and post exchanges would not be denied any person because of race. Let me jump ahead. Yes, this was before the Freeman Field Mutiny. Now, we know about that, right? We know that was the other side of the double victory. The example came from Madam C.J. Walker's lawyer's son, who turned around and came back and became the head of the NAACP for the state for 4 years and did sit-ins in Indiana before they happened in the South. Mm-hmm. I just had to throw out that context that what was happening, what happened in Freeman Field was not in isolation. Enlisted persons were being killed. The challenge of the officer that represented all the enlisted folks, that was a horrendous thing. And the NAACP and many other activities came to their aid. As a matter of fact, I think the NAACP sent this young attorney, what was his name? Thurgood. Now, he didn't represent, all right, but he helped prepare the case. So I just wanted to set that as some context.
And I agree. And one of the things that I really love about teaching is that you get a chance to push your students to try to uncover their own stories. You know, we go in and we show them the pictures of the Tuskegee Airmen or some other group of famous people who've managed to be in the history books. But we should not forget the millions of stories that are left untold, left unrecorded. And I tell students, you carry this little computer around with you all the time, take that sucker out and turn it on at the next family reunion. go to your grandmama's church or your granddad's church and turn it on and tape the stories up, because what we'll find is that these stories that we applaud aren't really that uncommon when you start talking to people, large numbers of people. So that's my wish, that we do a better job all the time. I was in Savannah the other day, and a friend of mine told me that his grandfather had been president of the International Longshoremen's Association in Savannah, a powerful East Coast union. And I said, the next time I'm here, we're going to sit your grandpa down and turn it, so that's my plea. Let's figure out more ways in our classes and our churches to get all students, regardless of nationality, taping these stories that have managed to escape the vision of the historians in the textbooks and so on.
You're talking about the personal histories, not the textbook or the bigger pieces, the
That's
personal
exactly
stories.
right. One of my phrases is, what has happened in history is not necessarily what gets recorded as history. And the way you demonstrate that, Dr. Bailey's talking all this stuff. Go home and talk to your grandmama and your granddaddy. And they come back and say, oh, guess what my uncle did or my aunt did. I mean, they come back with their own stories. And I think that if we can get more of that happening, so much that is happening today that's rooted in ignorance, we're going to impact that. Maybe not solve it, but we'll impact it, because more people will be knowledgeable or inspired to get more knowledge about some of these issues of race relations and so on that we are in such conflict about today.
I just want to put other context that we saw the Freeman Field mutiny. That wasn't the only thing happening during that time.
Right.
Port Chicago was another one, where the Navy personnel were trying to, they were being asked to move munitions unsafely. And they said, nope, we're done. And after an accident. So this was happening all over the military.
Right.
It wasn't just the Air Force or the Army or the Navy.
So, and interviewing military veterans that, we know or that are known to our families is one way to get at that story, and put it on a DVD or something and deposit it in the local library. I mean, there's just so many ways to try to keep these stories, alive and well and passed on to the next generation.
So let me tug on this thread a little bit more. We talk about all the things that the Tuskegee Airmen did in the air and in the military, all of those accomplishments. What do they do outside of that? And we're hearing bits of it here and there. And how did they contribute to society when they got home and brought some of those things that they learned to change the climate of what was happening in the 40s and the early 50s?
I know they all want me to talk about another guy from Indiana. But at this time, I'm really proud to talk about this Tuskegee Airman that actually is a part of the 477th. He was an enlisted. He was also a part of the 99th, and he served in Waterboro, South Carolina. What are you doing, Waterboro? How do you say Waterboro, South Carolina? It was a gunnery range, and he was an armorer. If he hadn't loaded the bullets, they wouldn't have known how to shoot and wouldn't have had that great victory. The gentleman I'm talking about is Robert Leonard LaRue. It's my father-in-law. I knew him. My wife was born 2 weeks after me, 4 houses up the street. Known this man all of my life. All birthday parties, he's got blackmail pictures, all right? But when he finished the military, came to the University of Illinois and obtained a degree in architecture. I think it was 5 years, right? And he went on, here it is, where Illinois helped Indiana. He became the 3rd certified African-American architect in the state of Indiana. Now, the irony with this is that I'd been involved with the Tuskegee Airmen organization, let's say 97, so that's about when we got married. And so I think it was about 4 years into the marriage before I discovered that my father-in-law was a Tuskegee Airman. He did not acknowledge himself to be one. He wasn't a pilot. There were 1,000 pilots and there's over 15,000 support people. Once he became convinced, he wouldn't take the hat off. I saw a change in nature. So I'm suggesting that the motivation that people can have by how they see themselves isn't just with young folks, it's also with older folks, even folks that did not recognize who they were. So again, I'm going to keep, this guy doesn't recognize who he is, all right? But he's fantastic, and he is what the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen can mean. And what you're doing, Doc, that's how we have to continue to bring it out. So let me just share this. When we did this 12 years ago, I had some Boy Scouts in front of a little bit larger audience, and the general was looking from the back. And he's like, Reg, how did you convince those Boy Scouts to be World War II veterans? I'm like, what? What's he talking about? They were all excited. They wanted to hear more. All I did was simply explain, and I don't think we've done this, how did the airmen do what they did? They exceeded expectations. All right? So you've talked about it, we've acknowledged it, we've talked around the edges, you want it concrete, you got to exceed expectations. They work with people they wouldn't normally, and you better be able to do that today. You're the only person, you better be able to work with green, red, blue, whoever. But most importantly, they had the courage to serve a purpose greater than themselves. So in spite of how they were treated, they were serving their country. So those are 3 tidbits. Exceed expectations, work with people that you would not normally, and the courage to serve a purpose greater than self.
I'll follow up on that. I am a huge believer that representation matters. And to me, the careers and the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen, and actually seeing them, told me as a young child that could possibly be me in a more intimate fashion than just watching the majority do that profession. General Charles McGee was one of my mentors. So you talk about lasting legacy. I've had many conversations with that great man. So his ability to mentor a young pilot when he was 99 years old is a lasting legacy that I just think is embedded in those gentlemen. I think the movie hit it on the head. They were special individuals. And General Charles McGee was a special individual that had the ability to mentor multiple generations on what his experience as an aviator was like. One of my fondest memories of my early career is when I landed from a junior officer tour in VFA 81 on the USS Kennedy and jumped out of the cockpit and was doing a post flight on my aircraft. When you land, when you do any landing, you walk around the aircraft to make sure the integrity of the aircraft and you came back with the same aircraft that you left off with. And I remember looking around on the flight deck, and as I turned around, I saw a group of individuals just staring at me and watching me do my post-flight. All of those individuals were young black men and women. And to me, it was a little bit uncomfortable. But as I continued to notice that when I walked to the aircraft, there was a group of people that were watching me, every single thing that I did. When I was out on the carrier on the George W. Bush, just a month ago doing an exercise, I was stopped every single day on that ship by a young black sailor, male and female. And basically the moral of the story was I'd never seen a black captain before. I've been in the Navy for 3, 5, 12 years, and I've never seen a black captain. And it was always a conversation. Every single day in 2022, I was stopped, and that was the gist of the story. So I'm a huge believer that representation matters. You have to see it in order to believe it. So that is the power of mentoring down to the younger generations, because I am a firm believer that the graduates of the University of Illinois in 2022 and 2023 all have an equal chance of doing the very exact same thing that I've been doing in my career for the last 23 years.
I think we need to take seriously the story about the impact of the military experience and what we witnessed in this movie on the civil rights movement. Because if you look at the biographies of civil rights leaders around the country, Medgar Evers' story I know well, Merret asked me to do a biography for children, and these guys came back from, what did Du Bois says, we went fighting and we came back fighting, or something like that. So their experience in Europe fighting against fascism, they brought that back. If we can fight against fascism abroad, we can fight racism at home. So there are a lot of these stories in many local communities where the leadership of the civil rights movement was strongly influenced by what these vets taught them. And your story about representation matters. I happened to see a little clip of the Venus Williams story on TV last night. And when Venus lost that first match to the French world champion, she was so down and she was crying and she just didn't want to leave, and she walked out, and who was out there? Hundreds of kids cheering her on, even though she didn't win. So that's the lesson there. I mean, that was a victory that people saw and understood, and a lot of kids start playing tennis after that, just like a lot of kids start playing golf after Tiger Woods. And whenever you get these sports figures and others who will become moral forces, it's going to generate some positive things. And that's what I think we have to keep trying to, fan the flames to get more of these kinds of experiences distributed and more kids active in learning about these examples that we're talking about.
Captain Gannison, do you want to say anything as well?
I mean, just pretty much echo what everybody else has said. I have to say the Tuskegee Airmen personally have inspired me to that model of just excellence basically in everything that you do has stuck with me throughout my Air Force career, and I'd have to say that probably them being role models not only for myself but for also my entire generation and future generations. I think that's definitely their legacy of just doing the best that you can no matter what adversity that you're facing.
Thank you.
Could I do a touch point off?
Sure.
So to your point, absolutely. The Freeman Field Mutiny is considered a model for the civil rights movements because the nonviolent aspect of the protest. And also significantly coming out of that, as those commanders were relieved and Benjamin Davis was brought on board, we kind of overlooked the fact this was the first time that an African American was installed as a commander of a military base in the continental United States, who've been in charge overseas. So out of this, there were many positive first.
Mm-hmm. All right, another question. Something I noticed watching this again, we heard a lot of we's in there, in the group, and not a lot of I's. How important is that in moving forward, is the we part of it? Sorry, I ad-libbed that one a bit.
I think that's what's taught in the military. It's all about teamwork. You can't achieve the mission, the goal, the desired end state without the team. There's on an aircraft carrier, it's 5,000 people. And the sole purpose of that organization is to take off and recover aircraft. And without each and every one of those 5,000 people, you cannot do it successfully. So there is no individual effort that's going to result in a positive effect on the mission. It's all about the teamwork. So that's what is, embedded in us at a very early age, and that is what's taught, and that's what I think actually makes an organization run, is the we mindset, vice and I mindset.
See, this is the senior leader. This is the leadership stuff. But then how does it work? It works. There can't be any type of prejudice. There can't be any type of discrimination. That's the lesson to be learned from the 477, because it corroded the operational capabilities of that unit, then they were not prepared to go forward. Again, I was speaking with the current commander of the 477th up in Alaska, but he was in Tennessee. How'd that happen? But that's what we talked about. That's their mission and purpose, is to stay away and be that leading edge unit to combat the possibilities of discrimination within their ranks.
Yeah, and that's such a problem in modern society, because there's so much influence, so many influences. You know, when I was growing up, your parents could shut down a lot of those external influences, and now there's more technology than any of us. I have a 6-year-old grandson who's better at some of these technologies than I am. So I think we have to be really savvy about leadership in the modern age and how we can utilize some of the distance education and so on technologies to instill values that would contribute to more of our generations in the future thinking about we and not just I. You know, it's fine. I tell my students, yes, go out and become a millionaire if that's your ambition, but think about social responsibility. Think about the scholarships that you might be able to give, from that money, or think about positive things. Think about how you can improve the lot of everybody, the broader society. So I think that's one of the challenges we have. And I look to young people to help us figure that out, because, I insist that my generation has not done enough of a good job, that we need to rethink some of these issues and find new energy to pursue them.
So there's one saying that my commander, Colonel Hopkins, likes to say all the time, that we move at the speed of trust. So when I go fly, it's myself as the aircraft commander, then another co-pilot, and then back home you still have the maintainers who maintain the aircraft, the SOM people, aviation resource management, who sign the flight orders, the ops team who sets up the flight. You have standing by, make sure we're following all the right procedures. You have schedulers who are actually scheduling everything. You have basically, at the end of the day, a third of the squadron working on one mission. And we all move at the speed of trust, meaning that in order to get the mission done, in order to move forward, we have to all build that sense of camaraderie, sense of unity, sense of trust with one another. And I think that applies not just for launching one single sortie, one single mission for the Air Force, but also for running the whole organization, for running the broader military, for running a society, for running our country. And I think that's honestly the values that are enshrined in the Constitution, like we were talking about before, that people like the Tuskegee Airmen, military members who stand up today and say, yes, I want to serve my country. Those are the principles and values that I think that we are enshrining today and supporting today.
Thank you so much. And I want to start helping us kind of wrap up, because we are getting towards the end of our discussion here, and it's been an incredible discussion. And I want to give each of you a chance to kind of say any words that you didn't get a chance to say so far. And I also just want to throw out there as a possible topic that you might touch on is what's something that all of us can go do, right? We've just heard about some inspiring figures in the past, but also that right now there are 2% black men or black people as pilots, men and women. What's something that all of us can do to help diversify and make more equal our world, in addition maybe to whatever else you wanted to say? But I think it's nice to leave on a feeling of knowing what to do next. And who wants to start?
Well, a few years ago, a group of faculty raised the possibility that we could improve race relations if we could get more students to understand more about everybody else. And so we proposed a requirement that the Faculty Senate adopted, so that every student who graduates from the University of Illinois, regardless of major, has to take at least one course on an underrepresented group based in the U.S. Because, business people would say, I don't have time for that, I got to do business. Or STEM people in particular. You know, I got to do STEM, I got to do calculus and so on. And what we've noticed is that and we didn't want them to take just courses in Afro. They could take courses. What we hoped was that aeronautics might figure out a way to build a course around flying and, you know, that sort of thing, that every unit would have that responsibility. And that's what happened. We have more students taking courses on ethnic minorities than we have a broader racial diversity of students taking. So I think that education thing is something we really have to take seriously. And I loved model airplanes, and I love flying, and I started taking flying lessons in the Bay Area and decided, you know, I'm going to be up there at 10,000 feet, and my brain is going to be on something on the ground, and it's not going to end well. So I stopped taking stop and goes. But that's what we have to do. We have to find more opportunities. You know, we have to get more students from aeronautics to think about mentoring a flying club for kids who might not get an opportunity, a robotics club. I mean, there's such brain power among our student body here, not to mention the illustrious faculty. We could do a lot more in terms of extending what we're doing and letting other people jump on board and benefit from it. So those are two of the ideas that, I mean, particularly focused on education, that I would emphasize.
Build up to the crescendo here. All right. Let's keep it soft. How do you do it? Got a sign back there.
Yes.
What the young man said back, you know, my first base was Scott Air Force Base. All right. Is that the center maintenance hangar? All right. At any rate,
yeah.
It's trust. What he said, the spirit of trust. That's how aviation works. That's how life should work. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about all this technology, there are soft skills that the airmen demonstrated that were essential. You got to show up on time. Can you be late on target? All right. Can we be late? You got to show up on time, and you got to trust. And how do we do those things? Well, you can do them in very small steps. Take some kids to the biggest air show in Indiana on June 4th and 5th over in Fort Wayne. Do some there's big air shows down in, Louisville? So do some things that make a difference and do it with someone different than you normally would.
I think that the military organization is the and especially a combat scenario is the great equalizer. If I'm at night and I'm on final landing my F-18 and I'm traveling 160 miles an hour on landing, and I'm looking at the back of an aircraft carrier that's moving away from me in order to generate the necessary winds over the deck to make that landing speed of that aircraft possible, and there's 4,999 people sitting on the aircraft carrier watching me come in to land, and the ship is going up and down on the waves, and the wind is blowing me, and I can feel the wind gusts, and I'm not off the coast of the East Coast United States. I'm actually in the Indian Ocean coming back from a mission in Afghanistan in an $80 million aircraft that I'm the only person in. Again, flying at 160 miles an hour, the slowest I've been flying all day over a 7-hour mission. And someone comes up and says, hey, 400, you're at 3/4 of a mile, call the ball. I find it very difficult to believe that I could care in any way, shape, or form what color that person is, right? The people, the men and women on board that are in charge of doing their job to ensure that I land safely will all do their job regardless of my skin color. And I think a combat scenario, our military puts us in those pressurized situations as Americans where we perform to our utmost. I think the best thing that individuals in America can do to ensure that every American has the constitutional protected rights of every American. My biggest mentors in the military, the Splash Coy, the individual that told me, I'm gonna pick jets because you finished #1 in primary, was a white man. My greatest mentor so far in the Navy, Admiral Bill Gortney, is a 4-star admiral and is a white man. One of the greatest military minds that I've ever had the pleasure to work for, General Mark Milley, is a white man. So to me, it takes a collective. It takes all Americans doing the right thing, what we all know to be the right thing, in order to form real change within our organization. The racism that the Tuskegee Airmen experienced throughout their time in the Army Air Corps, and the prejudice or discrimination that black people have continued to experience since that time, is not a minority problem. It is an American problem. And I think it takes all Americans to fix that. So I would encourage all Americans to listen. We've implemented a policy in the United States Navy that commands will go and have a listening session. Commanders will go and they will actually talk to the people within their organizations in order to listen and gain a further understanding of their backgrounds, what they think. And one of the main catalysts of this was the George Floyd incident. Mm-hmm. I think the George Floyd incident caused America to pause, and it made people realize potentially what's going on in America. Some people already realized, but it was an eye-opener to some people to actually see the murder of George Floyd on national TV. And that gave our military institution a moment to say, what's going on here, and to look and to listen and reflect. And one of the things out of that was the listening sessions, right? Going in, listening to the people who may not necessarily come from the same cultural background that you do, but can definitely lend to the experience that you're having in the military and further our workforce in the future. So that's something that I think all Americans can do to help our country as a whole.
And so to kind of go off what Captain Hampton just said, I think listening is important as well. In fact, I'm going to steal another phrase from my commander. We live in a culture of debrief. So as a pilot, no matter what airframe that you're flying, at the end of the day, at the end of your sortie, you sit down and you discuss everything that went right and everything that went wrong with the mission. And it's not to tear down anybody. It's not to make you feel bad about how you performed in that mission. It's to make you better. And the things that you say, they're said with love to make the person a better person. And I think that we need more of that in our country and our world. In order to make us all better people, to sit down and listen, learn from our mistakes, learn from our history, learn from these past events, but take that learning and move forward, and let's become even better than we were in the past. Let's become a better nation. Let's become better humans. So I think we all take a moment, sit down and listen, even just for a moment. I think, honestly, we will move forward as a country and be even better and stronger for it.
I want to thank you all for your time and for giving us your expertise and a taste of your history. And I want to thank you just for sharing your knowledge tonight. We hope that this conversation will continue. We've already had some great conversations about trying to kind of foster some connections here and continue having events like this. And we certainly want to make sure that the contributions of the Tuskegee Airmen are remembered and continue to talk about those in more detail more often. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to those of you who are here in person, as well as people who are here online. And with that, we're going to close and thank our panelists.
Captain Ganison, if we could have you back, we want to take some pictures with you.
I'm back.
Hang on, I'll get you in the shot. Hang on. Okay, just smile good. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you very much.